to 20 Minutes to Business Insights, a complimentary resource webinar series from AKA Coach & Company. I'm Annie Kirshenman, and I'll be your host for our topic today, the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video feed now so you can focus on our slides today. With me is Ann Barton. She'll be monitoring our Q&A. Now, this is a short and to-the-point webinar, and as usual, we have a lot packed into 20 minutes. We also hope to have time for a few questions. So if you have a question or a comment, type it into the chat box, and we'll take what we can towards the end of the session. For those of you who don't know me, briefly, I'm Annie Kirshenman. I'm a board-certified coach with the specialty designation Executive Corporate Business and Leadership. I'm also a business person, have been for more than 20 years now. However, the world of business is not where I started. I come from a background in the arts, and creativity as well as innovation are a major part of my work today as a coach and facilitator. I'm also a former executive. I stepped down from my CEO role in 2005. I'm an accredited facilitator and an authorized partner for the 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team program, and I just love sharing what I've learned, what works, what's interesting for me as well as for others. Ergo, this webinar series. So if you're joining us live, thanks again for being here. If you're watching a recording, thanks for taking some time to view it. Okay, to our topic for today, the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. It's based on the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which is the perennial bestseller in the business section by Pat Lencioni. The 5 behaviors of a cohesive team was developed by Wiley with Lencioni and his company, the Table Group, based on their research and experience. And the research is extensive. We do have a complimentary research report available. And for those of you who might be interested, we'll be sharing a link for that post-webinar. For those of you who are familiar with the 5 dysfunctions of a team, one thing to recognize about 5 behaviors is that it flips the concepts that are identified in 5 dysfunctions, putting the emphasis on positive competencies that teams need to develop. And here you see them. Starting from the base of the pyramid model, the 5 competencies are trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. And we're going to be taking a deeper dive into each of those in just a moment. First, we have a video introduction.
This is my team, my dysfunctional team. It may look pretty normal on the surface, but underneath, there are 5 things going on that need serious attention. Let's take a look. She can't ask for help. He doesn't want to risk starting an argument. He's only pretending that he's on board. That's me. I don't think it's my job to make sure he does his job. And he only cares about his own goals. So that's my team. Maybe your team has its own challenges. In his New York Times best-selling book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Patrick Lencioni identifies 5 core dysfunctions that most teams face. The first dysfunction is an absence of trust among team members. This stems from their unwillingness to be vulnerable within the group. Vulnerability is about being able to say and genuinely mean things like, I screwed up, I need help, and I'm sorry. Team members who are not genuinely open with one another about their mistakes and weaknesses make it impossible to build a foundation for trust. This failure to build trust is damaging because it sets the tone for the second dysfunction, fear of conflict. Teams that lack trust are incapable of engaging in unfiltered and passionate debate of ideas. Instead, they resort to veiled discussions and guarded comments. A lack of healthy conflict ensures the third dysfunction, lack of commitment. Without airing their opinions in passionate and open debate, team members rarely, if ever, buy in and commit to decisions, though they may feign agreement during meetings. Teams that fail to get this commitment develop the fourth dysfunction, avoidance of accountability. Without committing to a clear plan of action, even the most focused and driven people often hesitate to call their peers on actions and behaviors that seem counterproductive to the good of the team. And this leads to the fifth dysfunction, inattention to results. Inattention to results occurs when team members put their individual needs, such as ego, career development, or recognition, above the collective goals of the team. Another way to understand this model is to take the opposite approach, a positive one, and imagine how members of truly cohesive teams behave. First, they trust each other. They engage in productive conflict around ideas. They commit to decisions and plans of action. They hold one another accountable for delivering against those plans. And they focus on the achievement of collective results. And that's it. These are the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. Each one is a deliberate choice made by the team. They do require discipline and persistence, but the payoff can be big. And there's a nice bonus. Not only will the group be stronger and more productive, but high-functioning teams are a lot more fun to work on.
Okay, Anne, can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent. Okay, so as we saw in the video, in each of these 5 competencies, we are seeking to develop specific behaviors. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at each of them. Trust is the foundation upon which all of the other behaviors are based, so that's where we start. And again, as you saw in the video, we are talking about what's called vulnerability-based trust in this competency. And that's as contrasted with predictability-based trust, which is, if I've worked with you for a while and I say A, I can be pretty sure you're going to say B. I can predict that. But that's not what we're talking about here. Specifically, we're seeking to develop the capacity around the ability of team members to admit their mistakes to each other, to genuinely and sincerely apologize, and to ask for as well as provide help to each other. And it's very important to understand that if one person on a team cannot do this, it makes a big difference. Everybody on the team has to commit to developing this vulnerability-based trust, or it simply won't work. Teams that are able to do that will be able to then focus on developing the next behavior, which is healthy and productive conflict based on the debate of ideas. Now, Lencioni says that if a team cannot focus on conflict as the healthy debate of ideas, conflict on a team will become about people. So you can see why this is so important. And productive conflict is needed on teams in order for the team to be able to make their best decisions. It is predicated on team members being able to trust each other. And it's also important to recognize that conflict, even when it's healthy and productive, is inherently uncomfortable, but it's also inherently interesting. So if you're having boring team meetings, this might be a sign that your team doesn't do productive conflict very well. Teams that are able to develop that competency will then be able to focus on commitment. And specifically, this is buy-in to team decisions. And we're talking about buy-in here, whether or not individual team members initially agreed with the decision. And this is why productive conflict is so important, or at least one of the reasons why it is, because when team members are able to weigh in on any given idea that's being debated and share their perspectives and opinions, they will be much more likely to buy in to the ultimate team decision. This competency also involves clarity around direction and priorities that all team members are aware of. Teams who are able to do this well will be able to learn from their mistakes. They'll be able to move forward without hesitation, and they'll be able to change direction if it's necessary without any guilt. Once teams have been able to establish that competency, then they'll be able to focus on building accountability in the team. And specifically, we are talking about peer-to-peer accountability, where peers on the team and to accountability and pressure them to improve. So that's a really important concept here to bear in mind. It's not just about the team leader holding team members accountable, although that is, of course, very important as well. Teams who can do this will be able to identify potential problems quickly by questioning one another's approaches without hesitation. They'll be able to establish mutual respect among all of the team members who are all held to the same high standards. And teams who are able to do this will be able to avoid bureaucracy around performance management and corrective actions, which you probably know can be very costly to a team. Okay, teams that are able to do accountability will then be able to focus on collective results. And specifically here, we're talking about a team that benefits from individuals who are able to subjugate their own goals and interests for the good of the team. This involves crystal clear goals and objectives, again, that all team members are focused on and aware of. Teams who do this well will be able to avoid distractions that take them away from focusing on collective results. Team members engaged in this behavior will enjoy successes and suffer failure acutely as a team. And this is as opposed to making excuses on the team for why results are not achieved. And also, team members in this phase share equally in the rewards as well as the consequences of delivering on collective results. Okay, so why are these behaviors so important? Well, you've probably gotten the idea already that there is a real bottom line impact here, both in terms of decreased expenses and increased revenues. Teams who are able to engage in the 5 behaviors will make better and faster decisions, in part because they tap into the skills and opinions of all team members, and these are taken into account. They'll be able to avoid wasting time and energy and ultimately money on politics, confusion, and that destructive conflict. These teams will be able to create a real competitive advantage, and as we saw in the video, they're just a lot more fun to work on. Okay, so obviously there is a lot to unpack in this approach. And how can you begin to practice these behaviors on your teams? Well, I'm sharing with you a couple of ideas here. And as always, we start with trust because that is the foundation of the whole program. So these are a couple of examples here that teams have decided to do when they are seeking to develop a vulnerability-based trust team culture. And that is to share some stories with each other. And we're not talking here about big, heavy things or deep, dark secrets. Quite the contrary. We're talking about sharing interesting and benign anecdotes, perhaps from your childhood, something that your teammates might not know about you that will be interesting to them. Another thing that teams can do is to practice asking for and offering help to each other. Then if you're looking at fostering that productive conflict culture, here are a couple of ideas. And again, these are examples of what some teams I have worked with decided to do in order to become better at productive conflict. So the first idea is intentionally taking turns playing devil's advocate. Now, you may know that often this role will fall to one or two people on a team who aren't afraid to poke holes in ideas. However, when everyone is expected to point out potential problems, this role gets spread out, and the team will actually identify more possible pitfalls or problems. And as a result, they may decide not to go in that direction, or they will be able to prepare for those potential problems. Another idea is to adopt a no-pass policy on opinions. This is where everyone on the team is expected to share their opinion on any idea that's being debated. You can literally go right around the table and ask each team member, well, how do you feel about this? Or what is your opinion? Okay, so that was our very quick trip through the 5 behaviors. And before we go to wrap up and any questions that might be posted in the chat, we have a final word from Pat Lencioni.
My interest in teams really stems from my childhood, because when I was a kid, my dad used to come home from work frustrated by his company. Now, he was a great salesman, God rest his soul, and a great guy. But he was always complaining about the way he was treated at work and how dysfunctional things were. And I didn't know what that meant when I was a kid. But later on, when I got my first job as a consultant, I was dealing with things like strategy and marketing and other operational issues in business. And I found myself distracted by this issue of teamwork. Because I thought, man, if we could get people working in teams, really working together well, it would change everything from the way we dealt with customers to the bottom line and to the way people enjoyed and felt fulfilled in their work. You see, I've come to the conclusion that teamwork truly is the greatest competitive advantage that any group of people can have. And it's not that complicated. It's pretty simple, but it is hard because it requires a lot of work over time and a lot of courage. I think it's actually an intentional, strategic decision we have to make. And by making that decision, we'll be much more likely to accept the cost and the sacrifice that it requires, and that will make it possible for us to encounter the full power of teamwork. You know, if I could say anything to leaders in teams, it would be this. One day you're going to retire from your job. And most people that want to retire think about doing other good things in life, serving people, doing missionary work, or helping the poor, something wonderful. That's great. I want you to realize that while you're leading this team, you are having a bigger impact on people's lives than you may ever have. You change the way they go home at night, the way they treat their family and their friends and strangers on a bus. You affect their self-esteem, and that's going to carry over throughout their life. So let's not wait till we retire to realize the impact we can have on people's lives. And your ability to build a good team, to help them feel a part of that team, might very well be the most altruistic thing you ever do.
Okay, Anne, can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent. Okay, so in a moment, we're going to check in and see if there's any questions in the chat. But before that, what's next? You'll be receiving a follow-up email with information on the resources that I mentioned today, as well as a link for the recording of this webinar if you'd like to view it again or share it with a friend or colleague. and information on how to register for the next free 20 Minutes to Business Insights, which will be February 21st, that's next year, 2018, also at 12 noon Central Time, where we will be taking a look at mega trends you should know. What is a mega trend? Which ones impact business, and why are they important? So I hope you'll be able to join me for that. Okay, Anne, I don't see any questions in the chat. Do we have anything?
I haven't seen any either.
Okay, well, probably just as well because we're at time. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Here is my contact information if you do have a question or comment that we didn't get to today. But this has been 20 Minutes to Business Insights, a complimentary resource webinar series from AKA Coaching Company. Thank you for joining us live or for viewing the recording of this webinar. Again, I'm Annie Kirshenman, and this is my contact information if you'd like to be in touch. And I hope to see you at the next webinar on February 21st, 2018, when we will be exploring mega trends. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.